Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, a channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to discuss the quintessential cards needed to build the core of a life drain commander deck with Carrick, son of Yawgmoth, as its general. Carrick, son of Yawgmoth, debuted as part of the 99 in the Merciless Rage pre-constructed EDH deck from the Commander 2019 product. Carrick is a 2/2 Phyrexian horror minion with lifelink for 4 and 3 black Phyrexian mana. Black Phyrexian mana allows us to pay either 2 life or 1 black mana for each black Phyrexian mana symbol in Carrick's casting cost. Carrick makes each black mana symbol in the costs of our cards black Phyrexian mana instead. Whenever we cast a black spell, we put a +1/+1 counter on Carrick. Our general permits us to utilize our life total as a pseudo mana resource, which allows us to out-tempo and out-resource our opponents. Although we do not have an infinite life total, sculpting the core of a mono-black build with a nod to various life-gaining and life-draining spells and abilities is easier than Sunday morning. The +1/+1 counters placed on Carrick as a result of casting black spells makes him a formidable threat for one-shotting an opponent with lethal commander damage. Our plan here is pretty straightforward. The core of this build will be sculpted to focus on life gain and life drain spells and abilities for the purposes of draining our opponent's life totals and inflating our own in order to pay the life needed for our black Phyrexian mana costs. Since Carrick gets a +1/+1 counter each time we cast a black spell, there also will be a Voltron package which allows us to use our general as an additional threat in combat. As our opponent's life totals dwindle, our life total replenishes over and over and over again. This dynamic creates more and more opportunities to utilize our life total to pay for our black Phyrexian mana costs, leaving our opponents feeling overwhelmed and overmatched on our path to imminent victory. We begin the core of this build with some global life drain abilities that will tick our opponent's life totals down while boosting ours for the purposes of paying life for our black Phyrexian mana costs. At the beginning of our upkeep, Creeping Bloodsucker deals 1 damage to each opponent, and we gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. Seriously? This card is a common? Whenever Ayara, First of Lochthwain, or another black creature enters the battlefield under our control, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. We also can tap her and sacrifice another black creature to draw a card. Not only does Bantu's Monument reduce the cost of our black creature spells by 1, but each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life whenever we cast a creature spell. Whenever Zillowport Cutthroat or another creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. Whenever a creature attacks us or a planeswalker we control, Revenge of Ravens has that creature's controller lose 1 life and we gain 1 life. Note that this enchantment is triggered by each individual attacking creature. If 4 creatures attack us, then that opponent loses 4 life and we gain 4 life. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, Polluted Bonds has that player lose 2 life, and we gain 2 life. At the beginning of our upkeep, if we have the City's Blessing, Twilight Prophet has us reveal the top card of our library and put it into our hand. Each opponent loses X life, and we gain X life, where X is that card's mana value. The City's Blessing stems from the Prophet's Ascend mechanic, which means we get it for the rest of the game as long as we control at least 10 permanents. Tendrils of Agony has target player lose 2 life and we gain 2 life, but through its Storm mechanic, we copy this sorcery for each spell cast before it this turn, and we may choose new targets for the copies. Our opponents may not appreciate our gratuitous spell copying. Thrall Parasite, Basilica Screecher, Syndicate Enforcer, and Cryptghast have Extort, which means that whenever we cast a spell, we may pay an additional black mana. If we do, then each opponent loses 1 life, and we gain life equal to the life lost this way. Remember, Carrick's Black Phyrexian mana ability allows us to pay 2 life instead of a black mana in any cost, and Extort is a cost. We can pay 2 life each time, and most likely gain this life back or more as long as we are extorting at least 2 opponents. We also can tap Thrall Parasite and pay 2 life to remove a counter from target non-land permanent, while Cryptghast adds an additional black mana whenever we tap a swamp for mana. Note, since Extort is a keyword ability, the presence of the white mana symbol on each of these cards acts as reminder text, and reminder text has no effect on the color identity of a card. These cards are allowed in EDH decks without white in their color identities. Our opponents may not approve. Since Extort is such a powerful and potentially game-ending mechanic in this type of build, including Pontiff of Blight is as close to an auto-include as auto-includes get. This zombie cleric has Extort and gives Extort to other creatures we control. If any of our aforementioned creatures with Extort are paired with Pontiff of Blight, then each of them would have multiple instances of it, and each instance of Extort would trigger separately. Imagine that we have 3 opponents with Carrick, Pontiff of Blight, and 2 other creatures on our side of the battlefield. We cast a spell and pay a total of 8 life to extort the spell through our 4 creatures. Each opponent loses 4 life, and we gain 12 life. We end up netting 4 life. If these 2 other creatures have Extort, independent of Pontiff of Blight's Extort enablement, then we could pay a total of 12 life, have each opponent lose 6 life, and we gain 18 life. We end up netting 6 life. We are paying life to gain back more life. This dynamic is going to be very, very scary for our opponents. Speaking of scary, Sheoldred the Apocalypse rewards us and punishes our opponents for engaging in a simple fundamental aspect of playing Magic: drawing cards. Whenever we draw a card, we gain 2 life. Whenever our opponents draw a card, they lose 2 life. This peripheral life gain helps to restore our life total for the purposes of using it for our Black Phyrexian mana costs. Our opponents, well, they just lose life, and they become adverse to drawing cards the longer Sheoldred is on our side of the battlefield. Hopefully, they won't become averse to playing Magic with us in the future. For some one-and-done life drain effects, when Kokusho the Evening Star dies, each opponent loses 5 life, and we gain life equal to the life lost this way. An engine of repeatedly recurring and triggering Kokusho's Leave the Battlefield trigger can be game-ending. Speaking of game-ending, Exsanguinate is a mono-black staple for this type of build. Each opponent loses X life, and we gain life equal to the life lost this way. This sorcery is a perfect game ender after several turns of chipping away at our opponent's life totals. Speaking of perfect game enders, when Grey Merchant of Asphodel enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is our devotion to black. We gain life equal to the life lost this way. This zombie is a devotion-dependent version of Exsanguinate on a stick. To factor our devotion to black, we count the number of black mana symbols in the casting cost of permanents we control, and since we are focusing on cards with black mana symbols in their cost, a well-timed Gary can be game-winning. For sources of targeted life drain, Dread Presence has a landfall ability that has us draw a card and lose 1 life, or it deals 2 damage to any target and we gain 2 life. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. Note that Blood Artist triggers when any creature dies, not just ours. Sorin's Vengeance provides a 20-point life swing as it deals 10 damage to target player or planeswalker, and we gain 10 life. Speaking of life swings, when Shard of the Nightbringer enters the battlefield, if we cast it, then target opponent loses half their life rounded up. we gain life equal to the life lost this way. This massive windfall in life makes Carrick very, very happy. Our opponent, not so much. Now let's add a few creatures that synergize with our theme. Vampire Cutthroat has lifelink and Skulk, which means that creatures with greater power cannot block it. Vampire of the Dire Moon has Death Touch and lifelink. Indulgent Aristocrat has lifelink, and we can pay 2 and sacrifice a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire we control. Gifted Etherborn has Death Touch and lifelink. Null Priest of Oblivion has Menace and lifelink, and if we pay its kicker cost of 3 and 1 black mana, then when it enters the battlefield, we return target creature card from our graveyard to play. Vampire Nighthawk and Nighthawk Scavenger have Flying, Death Touch, and lifelink, and the Scavenger's power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types in our opponent's graveyards. Murderous Rider has lifelink, and when it dies, we put it on the bottom of our library. It also can be cast for its adventure side first as Swift End, which is an instant that has us lose 2 life, but destroys target creature or planeswalker. We do not have to rely on our life drain engine to win each and every game. As we mentioned earlier, our general has the potential to one-shot opponents. Let's shore up this possibility by equipping Carrick with some Voltron-esque components. Commander's Plate gives Carrick +3/+3 and protection from white, blue, red, and green. Trailblazer's Boots and Prowler's Helm make blocking very difficult as our general has non-basic landwalk with the boots and cannot be blocked except by walls with the helm. Finding an EDH player without any non-basic lands is a feat as rare as winter roses, although finding walls on the battlefield may be a bit more common. Rogue's Passage takes the guesswork out of blocking. We pay 4, tap it, and target creature cannot be blocked this turn. Grafted Exoskeleton allows an unblocked Carrick to easily deal lethal infect damage to an opponent, while Swiftfoot Boots gives our general haste and protection in the form of hexproof. Now let's close out this video with some additional cards that synergize with and strengthen our life drain theme. Jet Medallion reduces the cost of our black spells by 1, bringing us another step closer to casting spells solely with our life total. Eternity Vessel enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. Through this artifact's landfall mechanic, we may have our life total become the number of charge counters on Eternity Vessel whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control. Through this dynamic, we provide ourselves with near limitless life to use for our Black Phyrexian mana costs, as long as we get a land onto our side of the battlefield during each of our turns, of course. Since the possibility exists of resetting our life total, then playing with a copy of Aetherflux Reservoir can serve this build very well. Whenever we cast a spell, we gain 1 life for each spell we've cast before it this turn. If we pay 50 life, then we deal 50 damage to any target. Not only does this artifact gain us life, but it also provides us an alternate win condition, which could be used repeatedly due to Eternity Vessel's life resetting landfall mechanic. Both Volrath's Stronghold and Phyrexian Reclamation are perfect sources of recursion for our creatures, particularly for the aforementioned Kakusho the Evening Star and Grey Merchant of Asphodel. We can pay 1 and a black mana and tap Volrath's Stronghold to return a creature card from our graveyard to the top of our library. For the same mana cost of 1 and a black plus 2 life, Phyrexian Reclamation returns a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Remember, in order to activate these abilities, we must pay their costs, and if Carrick is on our side of the battlefield, then we can do so by paying 2 life instead of a black mana each time. For the purposes of thematic redundancy, let's include Defiler of Flesh, just in case Carrick is languishing in the command zone or is otherwise indisposed. This Phyrexian horror has a similar ability that converts black mana costs into black Phyrexian mana, except it only applies to black permanent spells we cast. Whenever we cast a black permanent spell, target creature we control gets +1/+1 and gains menace until end of turn. Bolus's Citadel lets us look at the top card of our library at any time. We may play lands and cast spells from the top of our library, and if we cast a spell this way, then we pay life equal to that spell's mana value rather than pay its mana cost. We also can tap the Citadel and sacrifice 10 non-land permanents in order to have each opponent lose 10 life. Ad nauseum is an instant that allows us to repeat the following process any number of times. We reveal the top card of our library, put that card into our hand, and lose life equal to its mana value. Whenever we pay life, we may put that many blood counters on Font of Agonies. If we pay 1 and a black mana and remove 4 blood counters from this enchantment, then we destroy target creature. Greed is a card drawing recess at the cost of 1 black mana and 2 life. So is Vilis, Broker of Blood. Whenever we lose life, we draw that many cards. We can pay a black mana and 2 life to give target creature -1/-1 until end of turn. If we would gain life, Alhammaret's Arcade gains us twice that much life instead. And if we were to draw a card except for the first card we draw during each of our draw steps, then we draw 2 cards instead. Whenever we gain life, Sanguine Bond, Defiant Bloodlord, and Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose have target opponent lose that much life. Veto also has an activated ability that gives creatures we control lifelink until end of turn for 3 and 2 black mana. Whenever an opponent loses life, Exquisite Blood gains us that much life. If Exquisite Blood is paired with any of the 3 preceding cards, then we can create a game-ending life drain dynamic that triggers whenever we gain life or whenever an opponent loses it. Speaking of game-ending life drain dynamics, the duo of Bloodchief Ascension and Mindcrank has it in spades. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost at least 2 life, then we put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has at least 3 quest counters on it, then we may have that player lose 2 life. If we do, then we gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent loses life, Mindcrank mills that player that many cards. In unison, these 2 cards can knock an opponent out of the game the moment they put a card into the graveyard, or whenever they lose life. Although building around videos tends to leave the mana ramp and the land bases up to each individual deck brewer, we would be remiss if we failed to mention the impact of Extraplanar Lens. In any monocolored deck, Extraplanar Lens can provide a massive boost in mana resources if utilized strategically. When the lens comes into play, we exile target land we control. Whenever a land with the same name as the exile card is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana of any type that that land produced. Since we're playing mono black, Swamp is the most featured land in our build. If we exile a Swamp to the lens's imprintability, then any player that taps a Swamp for mana gets 2 black mana. Why are we giving our opponents resources to try and win the game? We're not. Not here. Instead of skewing our land base towards swamps, we're going to replace them with snow-covered swamps instead. It is far less likely that any opponents with black in their EDH decks are playing with snow-covered swamps instead of swamps. This way, we restrict the double mana producing lands to snow-covered swamps, of which we have a plethora, and our opponents, most likely, will have none. Hopefully, we'll still have some opponents that want to play Magic with us after the game ends. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of a Life Drain commander deck with Carrick, Son of Yawgmoth as its general. Removal spells, disruption, ramp, and the land base can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. The cards discussed during this video are suggested options for crafting the core of a Life Drain EDH deck, in addition to providing ways to optimize this theme. Let me know your thoughts about these recommendations in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.